Oh boy. This video is guaranteed to make me some enemies, but there are some things that must be said. And the first thing that must be said is that most of what's being said by Musk and Trump as they go through this messy bromance breakup isn't actually true. And finding the truth is going to require a dive so deep that I hope you brought a scuba tank. But to make sense of the debris being caused by the wreckage of this bromance, we must first understand the major forces at play. An uncivil war has blown up between Musk and Trump, and many commentators are blaming their undoubtedly very large egos for it all. But I think the major factor at play here is actually the fact that Elon Musk is evolving rapidly in his worldview and in his politics, having turned from being a crony capitalist big government Democrat only a few years ago into a small government kind of old school Republican by 2023, and now thanks in large part to the 5 months that he just spent face to face with the swamp in 2025, he is now evolved into a full-blown raving libertarian. Welcome to the dark side, Mr. Musk. Musk is changing rapidly, kind of like one of his rockets, you could say. But Trump, he's not. Trump 2.0 isn't nearly as different to Trump 1.0 as what I'd hoped that he would be. Is he better? Well, yes, and in some meaningful ways that I'll cover in a minute. But I'm on the record as having really high hopes for Trump's second presidency. But the evidence is that Trump 2.0 is only modestly better than Trump 1.0. So where Trump has remained, broadly speaking, largely the same over the last 8 years, Musk's entire worldview and perspective has soared like one of his rockets. And it so happened that they intersected late last year, just in time for them to team up and get Trump elected. But even then, it was already clear that Elon Musk was more of a Javier Milei than he was a Ronald Reagan. He'd already moved past that kind of old-school Republican mentality, and he thought that Trump was on board a proper chainsaw Milei-style Doge project, slash and burn the federal government. We'll come back to that in a minute as well. But since the election, Musk has continued evolving, and he's still not in his final form, so to speak. So he's no longer the same man that he was 12 months ago, or even 5 months ago. He has become a radical libertarian, an enthusiastic but inexperienced and politically naive raving libertarian. And Trump? Well, Trump is still an old-school Democrat. He is a protectionist, a socialist. He views the government as the solution rather than the problem. And he's also a realist, with now nearly a decade of face-to-face time with the swamp. What we have here is a collision of the idealist versus the realist. And now that we understand the underlying forces at work in this spat, let's dive into some of the specifics, because honestly, what's unfolded in the last 24 hours has to be the best episode of Days of Our Lives that I've ever seen. Just kidding, I've never seen an episode of Days of Our Lives, but I imagine that that's what this would be. My name is Topher Field, this is the Topher Project, and I help busy people like you to keep up with the world as it changes around you. And boy did the world change last night. I had to wait until later in the day, Australian time today, to record and release this video because, well, for as long as the US is awake, this story was just evolving way too fast to keep up with. Now, if you appreciate what I do here at the Topher Project, bringing you commentary and analysis from an Australian perspective, then please buy me a coffee via the button at topherfield.net. I have a feeling I'm going to need a lot of coffee for at least the rest of this year, probably the rest of my life. So help me out. That's the button just there. And if you don't yet have my books, my DVD and merch, then you can grab yours from goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com. Okay, so we've laid the foundation. We understand the bigger picture, idealist versus realist. Now let's start to dive into the specifics. Elon Musk came on board Donald Trump's re-election campaign to the tune of $270-ish million US. In the pre-election hype, Musk jokingly proposed Doge, and Trump said, well, hell yeah, why not? Trump got elected, Doge was created, but immediately they ran into a problem. You see, Doge couldn't actually do what Musk imagined that it would. Remember, he's not experienced politically, he's new to this world, and he wanted to slash like he was a Javier Milei on ketamine, or at the very least like he was Elon Musk on day one at Twitter. But much to his frustration, that's just not how it works in government. And you can say drain the swamp as much as you want, but actually pulling that plug out requires you to fill out the paperwork first. Trump had already learnt this the hard way when he was president number 45, and he didn't try to cut nearly as much as I would have liked him to, but to his credit, as Trump 45, he did try to cut a lot more than some people think, but he was thwarted by a combination of the swamp knowing how to slow play, plus a myriad of legal protections for swamp creatures, plus activist judges, and partisan alphabet agencies, and all supported by a media that was completely hostile to Donald Trump and his presidency. The fact is that Trump couldn't do all of what he wanted to do, even though I would still concede that even what he wanted to do was still not enough. To his credit, he was at least trying. My hope was that Trump 47 2.0 would come into office with a vengeance, armed with new strategies, new techniques, an understanding of how the enemy would fight back, and that he would be seeking to make amends. But hold that thought, because that's not really what's been happening at all. But meanwhile, for Musk, he didn't have any of that history of being face-to-face with the swamp. It was only in January that he really saw the reality of what it was like to try and drain that swamp. And try as he might, and they did try, they just couldn't cut fast enough, given all of the tactics that the swamp can use to thwart the Doge project. Where Musk thought he'd be able to cut hundreds of billions, if not $1 trillion or more, his political inexperience led him to grossly overestimate how fast he would be able to work with Doge. But even that wasn't what actually caused this spat, causing everything to unravel in this bromance. It was the fact that Musk only realized after he'd been a few months in the Doge project that actually President Trump isn't really an ideologue like he is. And Trump wasn't really 100% on board the Doge project the way that Musk expected. Musk butted heads with people like Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and others in the White House, and while he was working weekends and sleeping on an office floor to save the US taxpayer $1 billion a day, President Trump, meanwhile, was promoting massive new spending projects like the Golden Dome, which, even if the Golden Dome were delivered on budget, and that's a pretty big if, that budget would single-handedly wipe out all of the Doge budget savings so far. So Musk started getting frustrated. His ideology wasn't playing out in reality. But Trump? Well, he just kept on trumping. Then along came the Big Beautiful Bill, which is a fancy name for a relatively normal spending bill, which, like every other spending bill for the last half a century, has approved unsustainable spending with more debt for the American people. Now, depending on whose estimates you trust, this Big Beautiful Bill allows the federal debt to blow out by at least $2.4 trillion over the next 10 years at the low-end estimate, and up to $5 trillion according to some higher estimates. Now, that means that this Big Beautiful Bill gives permission for the US government to add at least $750 million a day and up to $1.5 billion a day to the national credit card. And that is absolutely terrible and terrifying, and I understand why Musk is pissed. But here's the brutal reality. That growth, $2.4 to $5 trillion over 10 years, that would be the slowest proportional growth in US federal debt since well before I was born. It seems unbelievable, but stick with me here. Let's take the worst case scenario, the $5 trillion increase over the next 10 years. Well, that would be a 13.4% increase in total debt value in nominal dollars compared to their present debt over the next 10 years. 13.4% over 10 years, not per year, in total over those 10 years. Now that is unbelievably, actually, really good compared to any other decade since the 1950s. For example, from 1975 to 1985, debt increased by 240%. In many other decades, they are also in excess of 100% increase in debt in that decade. And to find a decade that is even close to the 13.5%, you have to go back to 1955 to 65, and that is still higher at 16.3%. And all of this is assuming the top-end estimate for this Big Beautiful Bill. If the $2.4 trillion is delivered on, then actually this bill will increase debt over the next 10 years by a mere 7%, which would be the best since World War II. Now, to be clear, I am not defending this kind of insane spending, this kind of racking up of debt. Let's not forget, they are already deeply into unsustainable debt, and adding anything to that at all is immoral in my opinion. But this is the real historical context into which Trump calls his bill big and beautiful. So when he defends the big and beautiful bill, well, he does actually kind of have a point. And it hurts me to say this because it goes against all of my libertarian instincts. But this bill does actually do a lot to reduce the rate at which the debt is growing. And that is an accomplishment compared to any other president in the last 70 years, including, by the way, compared to Trump 1.0, who during his first term accelerated the rate at which debt was growing. And so Trump is proud of this bill. And he says that this is him delivering on his promises of fiscal restraint. And unfortunately, yeah, I can see why he sees it that way. He only has a slim majority in each house of government, Congress and the Senate, and that makes tax cuts and spending cuts very, very difficult to get through because you'll need the support of all of the members of your own party to do it. And him making these tax cuts permanent and making some spending cuts elsewhere, well, that's always going to come at a political cost. And in order to get that bill passed, he's had to do some wheeling and dealing with senators and congressmen who aren't necessarily on board with his cuts. They want some pork barreling in their districts to help them win re-election over there in return for their support for the bill. Now, I don't like that that's how it is, but let's be realistic. That is how the real political world works. And so, Trump, having evolved moderately but genuinely from Trump 1.0 into Trump 2.0, well, he's feeling pretty proud of what he's achieved because he is in the real world. He has to deal with the real world Congress, the real world Senate, the real world budget. And he is getting real reforms through the swamp, which is impressive, even if those reforms are still not nearly enough. But Musk, well, he doesn't have to be in that real pragmatic, ugly swamp. He has the luxury of believing in the ideals of what could have been, what would have been, what he believes should have been. He's looking at what he was able to do at Twitter, what Milei was able to do under a very different and much simpler Argentinian system. And given that he fought tooth and nail to save $1 billion a day through Doge, him now watching President Trump approve a $1 to $1.5 billion a day increase in the debt, well, that feels like a betrayal of everything that he sacrificed for and thought they were fighting against. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why the shit has well and truly hit the fan. See, Musk, he had to play nice while he was deep inside Doge, but within days of stepping down from his position as a special government employee, he began to absolutely slam the big, beautiful bill as an abomination. And he's right. Adding another few $1 trillion to the already completely insane $37 trillion in debt that they have is absolutely an abomination. It is a betrayal of future generations. But unfortunately, it's not only up to Trump to make that decision. Trump doesn't have the luxury of operating in the ideal. He has to work in the real world. And in the real world, increasing the debt by only a few $1 trillion is unfortunately a genuine accomplishment in this absolutely munted world of Washington, D.C. And it hurts me to admit that, but it's true. Musk imagines that if he were the president, he could have got an even better result. And yeah, maybe in one or two ways that might have turned out to be true. But he, like Trump 1.0 did, would have run headlong into the brick wall of the swamp, and he would have fallen way short of what he idealistically imagines he would have achieved. Now, Musk is right to want a balanced budget. He's right that the debt being loaded up on future generations of Americans is an abomination. But he's wrong to think that this bill could have been a lot better. Yeah, it could have been better, sure, I think that's probably true, but not by nearly as much as what Musk wants to believe. And this is the difference between a rapidly evolving but politically inexperienced ideologue like Musk and a more cynical, steady, and politically hardened pragmatist like Trump. They could have been amazing together, and briefly I guess they were. But sadly, I believe this breakup is probably final. Given the mud that has been slung between them and the things they've said about each other, I don't really see them ever kissing and making up, although I will acknowledge that stranger things have happened. But before I finish, let me make one thing clear. Most of what they've said about each other is absolute nonsense. Trump has accused Musk of self-interest, of being upset by the ending of the EV subsidies. But that is deeply disrespectful and not true at all, and we know that because Musk has repeatedly called for the ending of the EV subsidies in the past. What he's actually upset about is that Trump's tariffs and his various spending and pork barreling announcements actually amount to subsidies for Elon's competitors, internal combustion engine US car manufacturers. So he's not upset that his gravy train is coming to an end. He's upset that the gravy train is still chugging along for his competitors. And let's not forget, before we accuse Musk of self-interest, just how much of a financial hit he took by getting behind Trump in the first place, assisting with Trump's election, and then working inside of Doge. This is a man who is willing to pay a considerable personal price for what he believes in. So that accusation, self-interest, that's complete nonsense. But Musk, for his part, has said that Trump is in the Epstein files. But that's not the win that Musk thinks it is, because we already know that his name will appear in the files because they met on multiple occasions, and apparently Trump did actually use Epstein's plane when his own plane was out of service unexpectedly. I guess that's kind of the billionaire's version of giving a mate a lift. But Musk was trying to imply much more than that. Not just that they crossed paths at parties and maybe chatted and he borrowed a plane one time. Musk is trying to suggest that, well, he's trying to smear Trump by implication, but that doesn't work for multiple reasons. Firstly, do you really believe that Trump would be deeply implicated in the actual criminal perversion that happened on Epstein's Island? And yet, neither the Hillary Clinton campaign, nor the Biden campaign, nor the Harris campaign ever used that information against Donald Trump in any of the elections that he campaigned in. That is not a credible position. And also, if Musk is saying that he knows something that the others don't, that he knows something about Epstein's list that maybe the Democratic Party wasn't aware of or wouldn't use, why is Musk only bringing that up now? Why did he keep supporting Trump for so long if he had this knowledge? Whatever it is that he's claiming to know reflects very poorly on him as well as on Trump. And I think this was just a cheap shot that didn't land, and it was very, very badly miscalculated on Musk's part. And I think it kind of illustrates that level of inexperience, the lack of sophistication that Musk has, because he just doesn't have the experience on the front lines. Now, the tit-for-tat between the two of them continued late into the evening US time, or for us, late morning here in Australia. The whole thing's ugly and unnecessary. You can see Musk's side of it on X, and you can see Trump's side of it on Truth Social, and Daddy are fighting, and the whole thing is just messy, and I just wish the whole thing hadn't blown up like this. But if you take a step back and look at it from each of their perspectives, the up-and-coming ideologue and the pragmatist, you can kind of see how we end up in a place like this. Musk is now talking about starting a third political party in the US, which, I mean, there's already more than two. There's the Libertarians, but he means a third major party. He thinks that he can attract, in his words, 80% of the American population. And that rings massive alarm bells in my head, because I think if Trump was left to his own devices without that third-party candidate derailing the next presidential campaign, obviously Trump can't run in that. That'd be a third term. He can't run for a third term. But if the Republicans are given a clear run off the back of a stable and steady Trump 2.0 presidency, then, well, I think Trump will continue to make cuts year over year over the 3 remaining years that he has. And so long as there's a stable handover, a stable run into the next election, then I think his successor could be J.D. Vance, the current vice president, who I can't help but notice has been strategically silent over the last day or so. And if that were to play out, then I think J.D. Vance would carry on that legacy of cuts. And give it 5, maybe 6 years, the budget would actually become balanced. And America might actually be saved. Not as fast as I would like, and clearly not as fast as Musk would like. But again, let's look at it through pragmatic eyes rather than through idealistic ones. I think something like that is about the best option that we've got. And Musk going nuclear now, especially if he turns around and supports a third-party run or supports some other third-party candidate, that creates a very real risk of a Democratic comeback in 2028, which would then undo whatever good it is that Trump might be able to do between now and the end of his second term. Now, to be clear, 2028 is still a long, long, long way away, and 3 years is a long time in politics, so this is by no means a prediction on my part. But I really hope that Musk can take a deep breath, tame his idealism. I love the enthusiasm, but this impatience, it needs to be tamed. Because whilst I absolutely agree with his position that this spending bill is an abomination, this spending bill is about as good as what is practically possible right now with Congress and the Senate being what they are. And what Musk is doing with his enthusiastic idealism, with all of that zealotry of a newly minted libertarian, well, that's not helping anyone, and it's certainly not going to help the American people. Now, to be clear, I am actually on Team Musk. Musk is absolutely 100% right about the need for radical cuts, chainsaw style. I said that since before Doge was started. I said that Trump needs to learn from the Millet playbook. I said it back then and I stand by it now. But I've also been around politics long enough to know that what's idealistically best is rarely ever actually possible. And there's a saying in politics and in life, don't let perfect become the enemy of good. And no, I'm not actually saying that Trump's big, beautiful spending bill is objectively good, but I am saying that it is actually a step in the right direction when you look at it in the context of the past, and that it's about as good as we could hope for in year one of this second Trump presidency. Musk is allowing his idealistic idea of perfect to be the enemy of the pragmatic good. And that makes this uncivil war between Musk and Trump a very dangerous one indeed. My name is Topher Field. This is the Topher Project, and I help busy people like you to make sense of the nonsense that surrounds us. I will, of course, be watching this soap opera as it unfolds to bring you perspective and context that, as far as I'm aware, you won't find anywhere else. Now, I am 100% viewer supported, so please head over to topherfield.net and buy me a coffee via the button. Lord knows I'm going to need a lot of it. And if you don't yet have my best-selling books, my multi-award-winning DVD, or my t-shirts and hoodies with various designs, then you can grab yours at goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com. And in the process, you'll be helping me to keep the Topher Project going so that I can keep bringing you news and perspective like this. Thank you for watching to the end. The algorithm loves you and so do I. Please like, comment, subscribe, and as always, stay free.